In this video, I'm not going to repeat the same old school training stories you've heard 100 times. No cliche, run 10 miles a day or hit the heavy bag for hours talk. I'm here to tell you what those other videos miss to match. Stick around. This is one video you won't regret watching. On the afternoon of July, standing at Toledo that day under the blazing Ohio sun, Jack Dempsey, the heavyweight champion, felt like a baby as he glanced across the ring and saw Big Jess Willard shrug off his bathrobe in the opposite corner. Cowboy Jess was heavyweight champion of the world, and he was a giant. Moreover, he was a perfectly proportioned giant. He was every inch an athlete. He tapered down beautifully from Derek-like shoulders, and his muscles were so smooth you could scarcely see them rippling under his sun-tanned skin. He towered 6 feet, 6 inches and a quarter. He weighed 245 pounds. In comparison, Dempsey shaped up like an infant or a dwarf, although he nudged past 6 feet and scaled 180 pounds. His weight was announced as 187 pounds. As he looked across the ring at Willard, he said to himself, "Geez, what a mountain I've got to blast down this time." He knew about blasting, about dynamite. He had learned about dynamite in the mines of Colorado, Utah, and Nevada, where he had worked off and on for about 6 years. And he knew plenty about dynamite and fighting. He had made a study of fistic dynamite since he was 7 years old. That was when he had his first fist fight with a boy about his own size in Manassas, Colorado. He was born in Manassas and spent his early years there. Before he fought Willard, his manager, Jack "Doc" Kearns, had already nicknamed him Jack the Giant Killer because he had belted out such big fellows as Carl Morris and Fred Fulton. They were big men, all right, but neither had appeared such an awesome giant as Willard did that sweltering afternoon. Dempsey had trained for Willard at the Overland Club on Maumee Bay. Nearly every day, Kearns and trainer Jimmy DeForest reported that he was shaping up much better than Willard. But when he saw Big Jess across the ring, without an ounce of fat on his huge frame, he wondered if Kearns and DeForest had been bringing him pleasant but false reports to bolster his courage. He wouldn't say he was scared as he gazed at Willard, but he admitted that he began to wonder. Did he pack enough dynamite to blast the Man Mountain down? And when the fight started, he sent Jess crashing to the canvas 6 or 7 times in the first round, and gave him such a battering in the third session that Jess was unable to come out for the 4th round. As Willard sat helplessly on his stool in the corner, his handlers threw in the towel just after the bell had rung to start the 4th. Dempsey won the World Heavyweight Championship on a technical knockout. He won the ring's most coveted title by stopping a man much larger and stronger than he was, one who outweighed him by 65 pounds. He blasted him into helplessness by exploding his fast-moving body weight against him. He used his body weight, the same force that could make a falling baby knock out a truck driver. And he used explosion, which is the most important weapon in boxing. In Jack Dempsey's case, and for most old-school boxers, explosion came from 2 things. Now listen very carefully. What I'm about to tell you might sound ridiculous to some, but it's true. One thing old-school boxers focused on a lot to improve their boxing explosiveness was another sport. Some even became professionals in it. It's quite ironic, but true. They trained in wrestling. Wrestling and grappling were essential, but often overlooked aspects of old-school boxing training. While modern fighters focus on isolated strength exercises, the legends of the past understood that true fighting strength came from real-world physicality, grappling, clinching, and controlling an opponent in close quarters. Back in the early 1900s, boxing and wrestling weren't as separated as they are today. Many legendary fighters, including Jack Dempsey, John L. Sullivan, Joe Louis, and even Pernell Whitaker, spent just as much time grappling as they did throwing punches. Why? Because wrestling built insane grip strength, core endurance, and overall physical toughness, qualities that translated directly into the ring. If you've ever been in a clinch or fought a pressure fighter, you know that controlling the opponent up close can be just as important as throwing punches. Old school fighters recognized this and used wrestling techniques to make sure they were dominant in close-range battles. One of the biggest benefits of wrestling for boxing was grip strength. Unlike modern fighters who train their grip with hand grips or forearm exercises, old school boxers developed their grip through raw, functional movements. Wrestling forced them to constantly engage their hands, wrists, and forearms, which made their punches heavier and their ability to control an opponent in the clinch far superior. A stronger grip meant they could manhandle opponents, control their arms, and prevent them from escaping or counterpunching. This wasn't just a theory, it was a real advantage in a fight. Jack Dempsey, one of the most feared punchers in heavyweight history, credited much of his strength to his early days wrestling and working as a laborer. He understood that in a fight, it wasn't just about landing punches, it was about being the stronger man, the one who could push, pull, and wear down an opponent. His clinch game was brutal, and once he got on the inside, he could shove opponents off balance, create openings, and unleash his devastating hooks and uppercuts. Without wrestling, Dempsey wouldn't have had the same ability to roughhouse and dominate his opponents in close quarters. But grip strength was just one part of it. Wrestling also built insane durability. In wrestling, you're constantly pushing, pulling, resisting, and getting thrown around. This made old school fighters incredibly tough. Their necks, backs, and cores were conditioned to absorb punishment. Unlike today's fighters who often rely on machines to strengthen their bodies, the old school warriors used real resistance, other human bodies. Grappling and wrestling forced them to build strength in the most natural way possible. And let's not forget John L. Sullivan, the bare-knuckle champion who ruled the sport in the late 1800s. Back then, boxing was different. Fights could last dozens of rounds, and grappling was a major part of the game. Sullivan trained in wrestling because he knew that fights weren't just about landing clean punches. They were about endurance, toughness, and being able to control an opponent in close quarters. His training gave him the ability to outlast opponents in grueling fights, where wrestling skills often made the difference between winning and losing. Even as boxing evolved and became more regulated, the smartest fighters never abandoned their grappling roots. Some of the greatest champions of all time, including Rocky Marciano, trained in wrestling to develop strength, balance, and durability. Marciano, known for his unbreakable will and relentless pressure, understood that if he could push, pull, and manhandle his opponent in the clinch, he could tire them out and break them down round by round. But somewhere along the way, modern boxing forgot about this. Today, fighters focus on lifting weights, using fancy machines, and isolating muscles. They've replaced grappling and real-world strength training with gym-based routines that don't replicate the actual demands of a fight. That's why you see modern fighters struggling in the clinch, getting bullied on the inside, or fading late in fights. They don't have the raw strength and endurance that the old school legends had. And after wrestling, another key element that played a massive role in the old school boxing era was chopping wood. Chopping wood wasn't just about building muscle. It was about forging the kind of relentless, battle-tested power that could break opponents down over 15 grueling rounds. Unlike lifting weights in a controlled gym environment, swinging an axe required raw, functional strength, explosive hip rotation, and total body coordination. Every chop forced a fighter to generate power from the ground up, just like a knockout punch. The stance, the weight shift, the torque in the core, it all mimicked the mechanics of throwing a devastating right hand or a crushing left hook. But it wasn't just about power. It was about mental and physical endurance. Fighters didn't just chop for a few minutes. They spent hours hammering away at logs, developing iron wrists, forearms, and shoulders that could absorb punishment without breaking down. The repeated impact toughened their hands, conditioned their grip, and built the kind of relentless work ethic that separated great fighters from the rest. Rocky Marciano was famous for his brutal wood-chopping sessions. He believed that if he could swing an axe for hours, he could throw punches nonstop in the ring. His trainer, Charlie Goldman, once said Marciano's training was so intense that by the time he entered the ring, fighting felt easier than his workouts. And it showed. Marciano had one of the most relentless, high-volume punching styles in heavyweight history, often wearing down bigger opponents who simply couldn't keep up with his pressure. Even Jack Dempsey, known for his ferocious power, used wood chopping to develop the crushing force behind his punches. His legendary left hook wasn't built in a weight room. It was built through grueling manual labor, conditioning his entire body for maximum impact. Fighters from that era understood something modern boxers often overlook. True power comes from repetition, from swinging heavy objects over and over until the body becomes an unstoppable weapon. Today's fighters rely on machines, resistance bands, and advanced strength training, but old school warriors knew the value of hard manual work. They didn't train to look strong, they trained to be strong. When you're cutting through thick wood, there's no cheating, no shortcuts. It's just you, the axe, and your willpower. And in the ring, that kind of training made all the difference. I hope you enjoyed this deep dive into the brutal, forgotten training methods of old school warriors. These weren't just workouts, they were a way of life, forging fighters who could go to war for 15 rounds without breaking. If you learned something new today, hit that like button and drop a comment. What's your favorite old school training method? Would today's fighters survive this kind of grind? Let's talk about it.